Imagine discovering you are the son of history's greatest hero, but that your nature is completely opposite to his. This is the story of Neoptolemus, the young man who inherited Achilles' strength but none of his virtues, a dark journey of revenge, sacrilege, and self-destruction that would forever change the meaning of being a hero's son. Our account begins not with glory but with a terrible prophecy that would echo through the centuries. In the court of King Lycomedes, on the mysterious island of Scyros, rumors whispered about the young warrior disguised among the king's daughters. Achilles had arrived there not by choice, but through a desperate strategy by his mother, the goddess Thetis. She knew that if her son departed for Troy, he would die young but gain eternal fame. If he remained hidden, he would live a long life, but be forgotten. During the months he lived disguised as the maiden Pyrrhus, Achilles fell deeply in love with Princess Didymia, and it was from this secret union, this forbidden passion amid deception, that a child was born destined to carry the weight of an impossible legacy. But here we must clarify a question that confuses many. How did Neoptolemus reach Troy at 17 if the war lasted only 10 years? The answer lies in the complexity of ancient chronology. The preparations for war took years. 2 attempts to form the fleet were necessary. Between the first failed mobilization and the actual beginning of the siege, approximately 9 additional years passed. This allowed both Achilles and his son to reach suitable age for war. When Odysseus finally discovered Achilles in Scyros through his famous stratagem of weapons hidden among jewels, the young hero departed for his glorious destiny, leaving behind a pregnant Didymia and a future he would never see. The boy was born red-haired like his father, with eyes that already carried a disturbing intensity. Lycomedes accepted him as grandson, but from early on noticed something unsettling about the child. Unlike the stories Didymia told about Achilles, a warrior capable of wrath, yes, but also of compassion and honor, the boy showed a thirst for violence that knew no limits. They called him Pyrrhus, in honor of his father's disguise, but also for the color of his hair that resembled flames. Flames that prophetically would consume much more than his enemies. Pyrrhus grew up obsessed with stories of his father. Each account about Achilles made him train with more fury, but also awakened in him a growing bitterness. How could he honor a father he never knew? How would he become worthy of a legacy that seemed impossible to achieve? The answer Pyrrhus found was simple but terrible. If he couldn't equal his father's nobility, he would surpass his ferocity. In the training fields of Scyros, the weapons masters began to fear what they had helped create. Pyrrhus didn't fight just to win, he fought to destroy. Where other young warriors showed prudence, he demonstrated cruelty. Where there should have been honor, there was only an insatiable hunger for domination. When devastating news arrived that Achilles had fallen in Troy, killed by an arrow from Paris guided by the god Apollo, something broke definitively in Pyrrhus's soul. The pain of loss transformed into pure hatred, not just against the Trojans, but against a world that had taken from him the only chance to know his father. But fate, as always in Greek mythology, had already woven its intricate web. From the Trojan battlefield came desperate Greek emissaries. Helenus, the captured Trojan prophet, had revealed under coercion the precise conditions for Troy's fall. Heracles' sacred arrows, the stolen palladium, and something no one expected, the presence of Achilles' son in the war. Odysseus and Phoenix departed for Scyros with a complex mission: convince a young man thirsting for revenge to embrace a destiny he knew nothing about. They found Pyrrhus, now 17, training alone at dawn. He was truly Achilles' image, tall, strong, with the same magnetic presence, but his eyes had a hardness that Achilles had never possessed, even in his darkest moments. When he learned of the prophecy and the request to join the war, Pyrrhus didn't hesitate for even a second. Here at last was his chance to prove he was worthy of the name he carried. He barely said goodbye to his mother, took his weapons and departed, leaving behind the last person who still loved him unconditionally. During the voyage to Troy, Odysseus did something that would change the course of history. He gave Pyrrhus the divine arms of Achilles, those forged by Hephaestus himself, which had been the cause of dispute between Ajax and himself. The weapons fit the young man perfectly, as if they recognized their former bearer's blood. Wearing his father's armor, wielding his sacred spear, Pyrrhus seemed like Achilles resurrected, but Odysseus, master at reading people, perceived that something was fundamentally different. Achilles fought with passion, this young man would fight with cold hatred. When they arrived at Troy, the Greeks received Pyrrhus with desperate hope. 10 years of war had exhausted their morale. They called him Neoptolemus, New War, because he brought new energy to a tired army. But it was a dark energy, fueled by thirst for revenge. Neoptolemus wanted only one thing: to kill Trojans, many Trojans. He didn't care about strategies, military honor, or codes of conduct. For him, every Trojan was guilty of Achilles' death and should pay with blood. His first great victory came against Euripides, son of Telephus, who had arrived from Mysia to help Troy. Euripides was a formidable warrior who had killed many Greeks, including Mycena, the army's physician. The confrontation between the two was epic, but the result was terrible. Neoptolemus didn't just kill Euripides, he tore him apart. He continued striking the body long after death, in a display of brutality that horrified even veteran soldiers accustomed to violence. It was the harbinger of what was to come. Unlike Achilles, who knew when to show mercy, Neoptolemus knew no pity. Where his father had respected the bodies of honored enemies, he mutilated corpses. The Trojans began to fear him more than they had feared Achilles, because Achilles at least had a code. Neoptolemus had only fury. When the moment came for the wooden horse stratagem, Neoptolemus considered it cowardice. He preferred to take Troy by direct assault, in a glorious carnage, but he obeyed orders and hid inside the construction, though every minute of waiting fed his bloodthirsty impatience. On the fateful night when the horse revealed its deadly secret, when the Greek warriors emerged silently and opened the gates for the army, Neoptolemus was the most brutal of all. He ran directly to the royal palace, indiscriminately killing everyone he encountered. Warriors, elders, women, children. For him, they were all Trojans, and all should die for Achilles' death. And it was in the courtyard of the royal palace that he committed the act that would forever define his memory in history. He found King Priam at Zeus's altar, wearing his old armor in a final demonstration of royal dignity. The ancient king knew he would die, but chose to face death as a king. With him were his wife Hecuba and his son Polyxena. When Neoptolemus burst into the sacred courtyard, covered in Trojan blood from head to toe, Polyxena tried to flee, but Neoptolemus reached him in front of his parents and ran him through with his spear, forcing Priam and Hecuba to witness the death of yet another son. Priam, in an explosion of paternal pain and fury, grabbed a spear and hurled it at Neoptolemus. It was a pathetic gesture, a frail old man trying to avenge his son. The spear barely scratched the young warrior's shield, but Priam's words cut deeper than any blade. The old king shouted that Neoptolemus was a monster, that not even Achilles, when he came to retrieve Hector's body, had shown such disregard for sanctity. Neoptolemus's response was icy. "Then go complain to my father in Hades." He grabbed Priam by his gray hair, dragged him through Polyxena's blood to the sacred altar of Zeus, and there, in the most sacred place of the palace, he slit the throat of Troy's last king as if he were a sacrificial animal. It was the most terrible sacrilege of that night of horrors, killing a king at the altar of the father of the gods. But Neoptolemus wasn't finished. He went to Hector's house, where Andromache was trying to protect her small son, Astyanax. The boy was the last heir of the Trojan royal lineage, and the Greeks knew that if he grew up, he could one day avenge his city. Neoptolemus tore the child from Andromache's arms. Some versions say he himself threw Astyanax from Troy's walls. Others claim it was other Greeks. But all agree that Neoptolemus made Hector's widow his personal slave, an intimate and cruel revenge against the man who had killed Patroclus. And there was still more blood to be spilled. At Achilles' tomb, Neoptolemus sacrificed Polyxena, Priam's daughter, in a macabre ceremony intended to honor his father's spirit. The young woman died courageously, arranging her garments as she fell to preserve her dignity, even in death. Even the Greeks wept for Polyxena's courage. Neoptolemus showed no emotion whatsoever. At the war's end, when they divided the spoils, Neoptolemus received great treasures, and more significantly, Andromache, Hector's widow, became his concubine, another symbol of his victory over Troy, and another wound in the heart of a woman who had already lost everything. Curiously, though he treated her as property, Neoptolemus was not physically cruel to Andromache, but the psychological humiliation of serving the son of the man whose father had killed Hector was torture enough. He sailed back to Greece with his captives and treasures, but didn't go directly to Phthia. Following Thetis's warning about avoiding the sea, he traveled by land, conquering parts of Epirus along the way, and establishing some of his men there. In Phthia he claimed the throne of his grandfather Pyrrhus. The old man still lived, but was too weak to govern effectively. Neoptolemus assumed real power, though he nominally respected Peleus's title. Andromache bore him 3 sons, Molossians, Achilles, and Pyrrhus. But Neoptolemus wanted more than a slave as mother of his heirs. He wanted a noble wife. He married Hermione, daughter of Menelaus, and Helen. She had been promised to him during the war. In one of the many alliances the Greeks made to maintain their coalition, there was, however, a problem. Hermione had also been promised to Orestes. Hermione was beautiful but sterile, and more than that, she hated Andromache with a passion bordering on madness. She saw the Trojan woman as the reason she couldn't bear children for Neoptolemus, and constantly conspired to kill her. It was this sterility that led Neoptolemus to his doom. He consulted the oracle at Delphi, seeking to understand why Hermione bore him no children. But his motivations for going to Delphi were deeper and darker. He also wanted to know why Apollo had allowed Pyrrhus to kill Achilles, and according to some versions, he was arrogant with the god, profaning his temple. Orestes was waiting for him at Delphi. Orestes still loved Hermione and wanted her back. More than that, he saw Neoptolemus as a usurper, who had stolen his betrothed by taking advantage of war's chaos. When Neoptolemus was in Apollo's temple, Orestes and his men attacked him. The irony was cruel and perfect. The man who had killed Priam at Zeus's altar was now attacked in Apollo's temple. The sacrilege returned to haunt him. Neoptolemus fought fiercely, killing several attackers, but there were too many. Finally wounded and surrounded, he fell before Apollo's altar, the same god who had guided the arrow that killed his father. He died as Priam had died, in a sacred place, far from home, victim of a revenge he himself had helped to sow. The priests of Delphi, in an irony not lost on the ancients, buried Neoptolemus with honors in the temple itself. The man who had violated Zeus's altar was buried with reverence in Apollo's sanctuary. Some saw in this divine justice, others, divine forgiveness. His tomb became a place of worship for warriors who came to seek his protection before battles. It was a posthumous redemption for a man who had lived without honor. After his death, Hermione married Orestes, finally getting the husband she had always wanted. Andromache was freed and married Helymus, Hector's brother, in a union that symbolically healed some of the war's wounds. Neoptolemus's sons ruled parts of Epirus. Molossians gave his name to the Molossians, the people of that region. Through them the lineage continued, eventually producing figures like Pyrrhus of Epirus, who would face Rome centuries later. Neoptolemus was remembered as a fierce warrior, but without honor. He had Achilles' strength, but not his nobility. Where Achilles was a lion, powerful but majestic, Neoptolemus was a rabid wolf, destroying everything in his path. He fulfilled his role in Troy's fall, proving that sometimes destiny needs monsters to accomplish its designs. But his sacrileges condemned him to die young like his father, without achieving the eternal glory that could have been his. The Greeks needed him to win the war, but few mourned when he died. His life was a dark lesson about how power without wisdom, strength without compassion, and revenge without limits destroy not only enemies, but the very soul of those who practice them. Neoptolemus proved that being a hero's son doesn't make you heroic, that inheriting strength doesn't mean inheriting character, and that sometimes the greatest battle we face is not against our enemies, but against the demons we carry within ourselves. His story echoes through the centuries as a warning. Beware the thirst for revenge, for it has the power to transform even the sons of heroes into monsters that history would prefer to forget. But perhaps, in the end, this was his true contribution to humanity, not as an example to be followed,
but as a warning of what we can become when we choose darkness instead of light. Even when we carry the blood of the greatest heroes in our veins, long break